um, audience questions or comments or observations, whatever you would like. So, well, as soon as does anybody have any questions or yeah, we have some people back there, right in the back.
How do you see? That's what I was going to say. How can you see that?
Oh, I see right there. Yep.
No, I can see nothing.
You gotta focus the left eye, like right.
Hello,
Hi.
Joseph. I was here last year or
Yep.
earlier this year. So a lot of just statements. In terms of grief, I think it wasn't covered, or at least something that needs to be acknowledged. Sexuality, because I think there's a lot of grieving process that a lot of people go through, trying to identify their sexuality. Migration, being an immigrant, I think there's a lot of culture identity that you have to walk away from. Embracing the new one requires a lot of grieving process as well. For me, I love furnitures, so hoarding. I think there's a lot of nostalgia with the things that used to belong to us or to someone we love, and I think that there's shame in trying to let go of the things that meant so much, even though they're just objects. And I think that there's a lot of people that struggle with that.
Yeah.
And I think there shouldn't be any shame in that. But it is a process. It's part of the letting go and moving on. I work for hospice, so
Okay.
acknowledging the doula, and I think that there's a lot of questions about what's the right thing to say to support someone.
Yeah.
But I think identifying who you are to that person and knowing your own strength and weaknesses is very important to show out. And I think we all want to help people, we all want to support, but I think it was mentioned that you can't really support someone if you're doing your own journey. And I think sometimes we do project how we want someone to have supported us versus how that person should be supported. Next thing is, I think grieving itself is just a multifaceted thing. And we think of it as just a process. It's a one-stage process, or at least there's a finite like time for specific people. But it's actually just a course of life. As you age, it's either you develop new experiences to overlap what was lost, or you get better at dealing with the people around you, or sometimes you just have to cut out certain people from your life. And I think, either like an association, an employment, or, some of your friends, like when I was younger in college, some people were really cool. And now I'm just like, what was I thinking?
We grow.
So I think as you grow, you develop a different identity, and you deserve a different kind of group too. And I think that like there's nothing wrong with being honest to how important those people are, or how maybe just not so important they are to you anymore. Because the truth is, you really need to identify like what's your most important value for yourself.
Sure.
And maybe just not rely too much on other people to say the right things. I think we're in a world where we want to be kind, we want to be the good people, but realistically, we're all still selfish. And we just need to accept that I want to be there for you because I want to be a good friend. And sometimes that's my priority, is I want to be a good friend. I want to do what I want to do for you, not what you want me to do for you. And sometimes just opening up with the conversation of what do you really want right now? And being open to the communication, because I think we don't talk a lot, or sometimes we just are too embarrassed to actually admit that we don't know anything because there's so much information. So just kind of like encouraging that conversation when someone lost something, to like speak up and create that dialogue.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Somebody in the back.
Thank you. Hi, it's me again. Gosh, there's so much to unpack on this topic. I'm a person that knows grief really well. So I want to touch on, for me, going through cancer, being pretty close to death. I know that I personally struggled with somebody saying thoughts and prayers just because that wasn't my religion, and a lot of people knew that. And to me, I took it quite offensive because if you cared about me, you wouldn't be pushing your religion on me, considering the fact that I didn't believe that way. And to me, something as simple as I'm thinking about you and that it's okay. Another thing I want to point out is sometimes you said that you shouldn't let people be alone. But for me, I needed that time alone to process and to honestly just be in terms of accepting what was going on in my life. Like I needed that moment of just leave me alone. Like there were just so many people and I didn't get a chance to process. And I was very grateful when they actually started leaving me alone a little bit so I could. So thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I guess, everybody is different.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody is different. So thank you for sharing that. And I'm glad you're still here. Yes.
Just to piggyback what she said a little bit, like I was just happy people showed up for me as I was going through my grief of my disability. Like I couldn't work anymore. And because I didn't have something visual that people could see, like I had an uncle say to me, well, you're not missing a limb, so how can you be disabled? Like he didn't get it. So when people were showing up for me, whether it was thoughts or prayers, I was just glad when somebody showed up because people didn't understand what I was going through. And I was 36 when this all started, to lose my house, my job, my identity, all of that in one fell swoop. And for people not to show up because they didn't have the big diagnosis of cancer, where everybody can wrap their head around that. And my mom would say, well, people don't understand until they go through it. And I don't believe that because we show up for people when we hear those big diagnoses like cancer and stuff like that. We muster up to show up for them because we know it's an awful thing. Well, nobody tried to understand that I wasn't terminal, but my life was completely over as I knew it.
Yeah.
And so I didn't have people get that I needed something from them because they couldn't be like, just like we make judgment about when we see people walk from a handicap park because we don't see they look handicapped. They must be just there and they shouldn't be. You know what I mean? Like we really need to try to understand people, what they're going through. And I don't believe that you have to understand, you have to have something happen to you to have empathy and understanding for somebody. And I feel like a lot of people in my life disappointed me there as I was going through my grief.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I truly appreciate that because you know what? That is so true. We do. And this goes back to a show we had here about empathy, right? And the idea that we do try to measure who deserves empathy and who doesn't, right? And we do hear certain words and we instantly feel sad or some type of compassion on those people. But then someone else, like if they lose a job, it's like, well, just get another job. And it's like, well, I have to grieve through this because of whatever reason was surrounded around that losing of a job. Or, now I can't pay my bills, or I have to work at this job, which pays me less than what I'm accustomed to. So my whole lifestyle has changed. So I appreciate you for saying that. So thank you so much.
I just want to say about the empathy part. A lot of times that depends on how old a person is and has the maturity to understand. And I would say just be grateful for people that do come to your aid. And the other thing, when people say, I'm sorry, I think that's a wonderful thing. I like it when people say that to me. It's like, it's not an apology. They're saying, I'm sorry to hear this. I'm sorry this is happening to you. And I'm here for you. So that's all.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, that's the beautiful thing about these conversations, that we all come from different perspectives and experiences, and our love languages or the way we like to be nurtured looks different, right? And it's okay for us to talk about that. Did anybody want to say anything back to anybody? Not back, but like kind of comment on that. We're not talking, but kind of comment on what anyone has said.
Yeah, we have an activity we do at the Grief Center with the kids, and it's just a page with a heart on it. And I say, write everything down that someone has said to you after you died or after your person died. And we go through afterwards and say, okay, put band-aids over the ones that were not helpful for you. And so when you compare hearts with all the kids, one kid, someone said, well, at least they're in a better place. And that was helpful for one of the kids because it was like, oh, I'm glad my dad's in heaven now. Yeah. And for another kid, it was like, I hated hearing that. So to compare hearts and to see, everyone does grieve differently. Yeah. So that activity is pretty powerful for all ages.
And it helps you know how to help them, right? And support them. Right. And that's what's important. So when people talk, then we're able to know, okay, this is what you need specifically. And I'm not just making assumptions, right? Yeah. Right. The thing that gets me when people lose children is when people say, and this like grinds my gears, is when people say like things like, well, God needs another angel or something like that. I just, and that's nothing against your belief. It's just like, well, I didn't want to let go of my angel right now, so I've never understood why people say that, but they feel good saying it. So that's a whole nother conversation. All right.
Yeah. Hi. I have lived a long, long time and gone through so many losses. And when it comes to grief, it's as though grief is so much stronger an emotion than any other emotion that we've gone through. And what I've come to is our identity is oftentimes tied to that relationship. And the fact that that person is no longer on earth in our presence, available to us, makes it that much harder to continue in our existence. And I say that because I lost my mother when I was 50. And up to that point, I used to always say I had friends that were losing family, had never lost a close family member. And the thought of my mother dying, we watched her go through this illness, knowing that she was about to die, but the family in general, very religious, nobody wanted to say, she's dying, so let's do this or do this. We were praying for her. We were praying for a miracle throughout the journey that she was going through. And inside of me, I'm saying, she's dying. She's dying, and nobody's talking about it. Now, I don't know what we would say, but it's just one of those things and that has been the hardest thing. I still grieve my mother, but the grief is my missing her. The relationship we had, she was the only person I could say certain things to. She's the only person I could feel a certain way. And the reason why I've thought about this a lot because recently I had a change in my relationship in my marriage. Married for 34 years. My husband went through some things, and I'm saying, hell, I can't even get divorced at 74 years old. So I got to hang in here with this creature. So it's like, okay, you got to become somebody different if you go hang in here with it. And that is another law when we talk about grief. It's like, oh, wow. I'm going through something extreme. Yeah. And I'm 74 years old. I've been this kind of person and believing this. And now I got a couple of somebody new. But anyway, that's another whole meeting.
No, so that is my aunt. So that's why I was laughing. So I would not laugh at other people. No, I'm kidding. So, and I'm glad that you touched on that because, talking about my grandmother, and it's interesting because that is part of the things you grieve, right? What would have been. I think about the person and you say, oh my goodness, she would love to see her grandkids, great grandkids. She would be happy to see that I turned out okay. Because a lot of people had questions when I was younger. And so, that is part of that grieving process where it's a continual thing where you think about, oh my goodness, she would be amazing sitting here in this chair and everybody's around her and kids are running around and great grands are running. She would have loved it. And so that is the part that you grieve, right? You miss the person, but you also are grieving what could have been, right? So thank you for sharing that.
Yes. I have a question. I've lived a long time, probably a year longer than her.
That's my other aunt.
But the grief doula, I've never.
Yeah.
Oh, death doula, that's what it is. I've never heard of that before. When do you call this person in? Is that similar to like when you call a preacher or the priest in? I don't know anything about what a death doula does.
Yeah, so death doula or end of life doula is pretty new to this area. There are more in, of course, larger locales. There's quite a few in Ann Arbor, actually, where I went to school for this. But it varies when a death doula is brought in, but quite often they are brought in at the beginning of hospice for people. There are also instances where death doulas are brought in when there's an instantaneous death. Death doulas can even go to the morgue to identify people. If the family lives far away and a person has died here, the death doula can do practical things like identify the person and make arrangements for that person to travel to where they have to go. It's all the way from the practical by getting advanced care plans together, helping organize funerals or memorials. It's legacy projects. It's just listening to people if they don't want to talk to anybody else about death, the fact that they're dying. They will often talk to a hospice worker or a death doula. Death doulas do not take the place of hospice. Hospice provides medications and they take care of patients as they're going through the process of passing. But death doula is there and can provide respite care for caregivers, but is not a caregiver themselves. They're more kind of gap fillers. They can be there for a lot of different things. They can consult with families. They can be more involved and can provide even rituals around death. And just make anything that it takes really to make someone have a good death. And it can be an extremely broad spectrum of things that we do.
Thank you.
This person, how do you know? If I'm not serious, are you like through a therapist office or how to hospitals or?
Do people just Google death doula? I mean, I'm so serious.
People can Google death doula. Since I'm fairly new to the area, I'm going to be doing a lot of presentations for different organizations. Hospices can call me in. Families can call me in. Even funeral homes, if they've been notified that somebody is making arrangements and wants some help. Friends, a lot of it is referral. Some people will know about a death doula and they know somebody that's passing and they will ask for that person. So, a lot of different ways.
Are you part of hospice?
Not part of hospice, no. Yes. Some death doulas do volunteer for hospice. I decided not to do that. This is a viable career, and it's not so much for myself, but there will be more death doulas coming to the area, and it will be a career here for people in the future. So I don't want to minimize that.
Sure.
Did that answer your question, hey, Jerry? Do you have something you need to tell us? You asked. Oh, me! Next question.
Okay, I have a short, long story followed by a question. So in my family, although we've lost a lot of people, so my grandma lost my uncle and my aunt and my grandpa. all before my dad was like 16 years old.
Mm-mm.
So a lot of death has kind of followed our family around. And as my grandma says, she's always being haunted by somebody.
Mm.
And I think that is just because she was never able to talk about the grief and those kinds of things. And when my dad was older, I must have been like 6 or 7 years old, is when he went to a funeral and was like sobbing in the back. And he finally like seeked out grief counseling and those kinds of things to deal with the death of his family members. And then fast forward, in 2016, we lost my grandpa and my favorite aunt, but don't tell my other aunts that. And I was really there hanging out with my mom because it was her dad and her sister, and making sure that like she got through it.
Mm-hmm.
Because we were never taught how to grieve somebody. So I just was like there just in case she needed me, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess my question is, how do we teach each other and kids and families how to grieve when culturally it was never something that we were like allowed to do? And I don't know if that's even 100% true, but that's how I felt growing up.
Sure.
So that's my question.
I think that's a great question. I mean, that's a great question because people don't talk about it, but nobody just doesn't talk about it. And that's how you learn not to talk about it.
Right.
So anybody want to take that, answer that? How do we teach people?
Sure.
No.
I'll talk about it. So what's been really helpful for my family is starting.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just around death, but we have multiple hard conversations. And I think that that's been really, really helpful too, because like you talked about, it's about culture. Like, how do we change something that's so woven into the fabric of our community? And since we're part of the community, usually it's woven into at least for me, it was woven into the fabric of my family. It was starting to first approach it with, it's allowed, like anything in my family. And I think that was helpful also for my recovery. It's allowed to be talked about. We should be talking about these types of things. Anything that we're going to, especially something so like traumatic, man. What a tragedy when tragedy besets us and it encourages other tragedy to happen, that it rips a family apart. Like, and I think that lots of that can be prevented, at least for my family. We encourage each other to talk about hard things. Like, and that, since that's such an overarching idea, it helps with all these different avenues, so I just like talk about it. Talk about it.
Yeah, I think that is so important. I think it is so important. I think that we don't emphasize it enough and create those spaces where people can just bravely say what they're going through, right? Without us trying to judge it or trying to correct it or trying to
Fix it.
Yeah, just say it. I think about, I used to work with children, like all the kids that had, like their families had a history of like sexual abuse, right? And you hear these little kids talking about that and how they can't tell anybody because nobody wants, nobody, even though everybody knows what's happening, people know things, but nobody talks about it. And that used to really frustrate me. Mm-hmm. And I did not know how to help them besides helping them in that moment with them, being there for them, being a constant for them when they came in my presence. But I still knew they had to go back into these situations where there was potential harm for them. And we don't talk about it. I mean, we know of families, right? That, it's just this cycle of abuse and people don't say anything. And then I think about the other part of this. Another part of that is, with like when people are going through dementia, right? And you have to grieve this person that
it's still right there.
It's still right there, but they don't know you, right? They don't recognize you. They talk to you like they're meeting you for the first time. And then nobody talks about it, that grandma was going through dementia or Uncle, Tommy is going through this, and how to venture through it. And it's so frustrating to me because it's like we all see it. I just am amazed by the fact that we all see these things, and nobody wants to open their mouths, and just say, "Hey, we don't you see that too?" Yes, I do. So anyway, that's my soapbox.
That was a good one. It was a good one.
All right. Oh my gosh.
I just have a note of appreciation for the conversation regarding anticipatory grief, because I spent most of this year and part of last kind of going to a lot of doctor visits and hearing from the doctors that, because I had a tumor and they just weren't certain what it was going to be, and just kind of telling me that my odds weren't looking good, and that, that things were probably going to end up looking different for me. And so for a while, because I didn't have answers and nothing had truly ended, none of that sadness or worry felt valid or real. So I think that discussion is so important to have, because I was grieving this idea of what my life would look like, and, the struggles I was facing, even though there was no name to what I had, but still having it. So I think that that conversation I really appreciated, and also just want to thank you all for your vulnerability and serving on this panel.
Thank you, Madeline. Oh, okay, she's gonna make me cry. All right. Anybody else?
While you're walking, can I give another definition?
Please, go for it.
So disenfranchised grief
is
grief that isn't validated by society or by yourself.
Yes.
So a lot of grief, there's a stigma around grieving a suicide death or overdose, or just any type of grief that doesn't feel like it's validated from externally or internally.
Sure.
So it's definitely something to look into. It might help validate some of those emotions when you don't feel validated from society.
Why do we do that to people? Oh my goodness. I just don't get it.
I wish I knew.
All right. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
You got me holding.